Welcome back. As Bonnie lights our chalice this morning, I invite you to speak aloud our affirmation, keeping muted as you do so if you're on Zoom. The words are printed in the chat line, and you may rise if you'd like to speak the affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship. So you can stay standing and actually get a chance to say hello to some people.
Let's begin almost 500 years ago. In January of 1556, Peter Genesius publicly declared his anti-Trinitarian views during the General Synod of the Reformed Calvinist Churches of Poland, held in the village of Sesame. And for those of you not up on your traditional church lingo, a synod is an ecclesiastical assembly of believers, kind of like RGA. 3 months later, he was excommunicated. And so begins a schism that culminates in June of 1565, when Peter, along with a number of other clergy and laity, break all ties with the Calvinists and form their own synod, the Minor Reformed Church of Poland, aka the Polish Brethren. And now, some 460 odd years later, the consequences of these events still affect our lives and our faith. Peter was born in 1525 to a peasant family. He became a Catholic monk, graduated from the University of Krakow, and was ordained to the priesthood in 1546. And in 1551, his bishop sent him to Italy to attend the University of Padua, where he graduated with a doctorate in theology and was appointed to the faculty. And it's here in Italy that he's exposed to radical new ideas. And in 1555, he lectures in defense of the anti-Trinitarian theologians, Michael Servetus and Matteo Garibaldi, and he is dismissed from the university. Canceled, we might say today. He converted to the Protestant faith, returned to Poland, and his story leads to where we began, the schism with the Trinitarian Calvinists. The Polish Brethren were Socinians, named after the Italian theologian Fausto Sozzini. They rejected the views of Orthodox Christian theology on many points, including the doctrine of the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, and the idea of original sin. Even more radically, particularly for the times, Genesius claimed that true belief resided with the authority of the laity, and that the individual conscience superseded that of civil authority, which at the time was largely synonymous with religious authority. He opposed the feudal system and serfdom, in spite of which he managed to maintain the patronage of at least one member of the nobility to support him as pastor, because that's how pastors got supported in those days, that took place in the time. And in Britain and North America, Socinianism later became a catch-all for any kind of dissenting belief. The Brethren were pacifists. They were against capital punishment, and they advocated for the separation of church and state. They taught the equality and brotherhood of all people. They opposed social privileges based on religious affiliation. They refused military service and declined to serve in political offices. 1602, they established an influential Academy and Printing Press, which spread their ideas across both Western and Eastern Europe via their graduates and their publications. Two overarching principles emerged in the history of the Brethren: reason and religious tolerance. Their tradition of discussing theology was based on the faculty of reason and the democratic process. They emphasized rational discussion in clarifying their beliefs. Even the phenomenon of prophecy had to be interpreted with reason. Their approach to dialogue included propagating ideas via publishing books, and then discussing and debating them at synods. Although they did not reject all authority, they did not agree on who or what could be that authority. Their structure became a peership of equals rather than hierarchical. They emphasized rational thought, critical interpretation of sources, and verification of theoretical claims. Of course, this leads to the idea of tolerance for other beliefs, as they emphasized reason instead of doctrine or dogma. Doesn't that all sound familiar? Their movement was Unitarian, although they didn't identify as such until a little bit later. And they preceded the Transylvanian churches by a couple of years. So let's zoom out to a bigger historical view for a moment. This is all taking place roughly 1,000 years after the decline of the Western Roman Empire. Europe has emerged from the Middle Ages, is in the middle of the Renaissance. Martin Luther had published his 95 Theses 30 years earlier, and the Protestant Reformation is fully established in Northern Europe. And then the Counter-Reformation kicks in with a vengeance. Their academy was shut down in 1638 under the pretext that several students had allegedly destroyed a roadside cross. The local Catholic bishop forced the closure of the school, and all its buildings were razed to the ground. Most of the teaching staff and students went into exile in Transylvania or the Netherlands. And in 1658, the Polish nobility, who were largely Catholic, banned their religion and expelled the rest of the Brethren from Poland. They were given 2 years to sell their belongings and move, or they could embrace Catholicism and stay. Most chose to leave, and they scattered. Some to Transylvania and Prussia, a few to England, but most to the Netherlands, where they settled in Amsterdam, which is then a hotbed of social, political, and religious radicalism. It's in Amsterdam that two things happen. First, they take on the label of Unitarian. And second, they decide that all of the works of their theologians and intellectuals should be collected and published in one enormous compilation, which they managed to do in 1668 with the publication of the Library of the Polish Brethren, called Unitarians. And a few years later, 1674, the book is placed on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of books prohibited by the Catholic Church. Some Catholic theologians went as far as calling it one of the most dangerous publications to Christianity. And just as a side note, that index was not suspended until 1967. The Brethren and their published works are considered to have influenced many Enlightenment thinkers, including John Locke, who owned a complete set of all 9 volumes of the library. Isaac Newton, who was privately anti-Trinitarian, also collected many of their works. The Brethren certainly informed the development of Unitarianism as we know it. John Biddle, known as the father of English Unitarianism, translated several of their publications into English. And through American Unitarianism, their ideas influenced many of the founders of the United States. We know that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson attended sermons of their friend and Unitarian preacher, Joseph Priestley, who openly cited the Polish Brethren as influences. So we can trace our presence here today to a bunch of radical Polish Christians who lived and thought and worked 460 odd years ago. What strikes me are the similarities to our times. Disinformation campaigns, the banning of books, cancellations, the casting out of unbelievers. And then people fought and died over ideas and beliefs like Arianism and Socinianism, or whether you were Protestant or Catholic or which flavor. And like today, there seemed to be no middle ground in these conflicts. Today, our tribes may have different names and signifiers, but much seems to have stayed the same. But reason and tolerance showed the way to something new. Without the ability to reason together, there can be no democratic institutions. Without tolerance for other beliefs and cultures, there can be no cosmopolitan, multi-religious, multicultural societies. So I think it's worth asking the question again. What is reason? Reason is both the key to freedom and an imperative. It was the key to freedom in a world dominated by authority based on revelation, superstition, fanaticism, and inherited privilege, because reason allowed normal people to discern the truth. And this is still true today. Reason is an imperative because, as Immanuel Kant recognized, reason cannot be a fact about the world, but a demand on it. For everything that happens, find the reason why it happened this way rather than that. It is reason that allows us to go beyond whatever experience we are given and allows us to think, this could have been otherwise. Why is it just like this? The actual is given to us, but it takes reason to conceive the possible. Without that capacity, we couldn't begin to ask why something is the way it is, or imagine that it might be better. These abilities form the basis of both scientific research and social justice. These abilities are so fundamental that we can hardly imagine functioning without them, and we're very likely to take them for granted. There have been several ages of reason in the human story. In Egypt, ancient Egypt, there was one that started around 1500 BCE. In China, another one around 750 BCE. In India and Greece, around 600 BCE. And in the mix of competing Middle Eastern monarchies that finally came under the rule of Islam, about 900 CE. And from 1685 to 1815 in the Western European world, the age of reason that we call the Enlightenment. It's called the Enlightenment for reason, which is that it arose from darkness and cast light in the darkness. This was not just the darkness of their recent history. Decade upon decade of brutal religious war, poverty, injustice, superstition, ignorance, but also the darkness of the prevalent Christian view that we are all evil by nature. And every one of these ages has passed into history. Each of them was followed by what Oswald Spengler called the second religiosity, a renewal of religion fostered by an alliance between intellectuals convinced that rationalism had failed and the masses that had never really accepted rationalism in the first place. I think we see that happening now in the world around us. An age of reason is passing, and we are simply left to deal with that fact. But just because reason and tolerance are no longer dominant cultural forces, doesn't mean they simply go away. They're just no longer dominant, and they need to be kept alive and championed. We're at a time of change as dynamic and uncertain as the time of the brethren. Like them, we do not know what will arise from the changes happening around them. Like them, we seek a better future. As did the brethren in a time of great change, we must keep our faith in reason and tolerance.
Is that muted?
Faith in the freedom of a real diversity of viewpoints and beliefs. Faith in the freedom to question and challenge orthodoxies, even our own. Faith in the freedom to reason together. These values have guided us through some 500 years or more, and they are our heritage and our living tradition. Reason and tolerance may go in and out of fashion, but they never go out of style. Let us keep the chalice burning in the window, a beacon of light for the world in the years ahead. Thank you for listening, and may it be so.